Gerry Crispin.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I really want to take you on a little bit of an adventure. I want to share with you some of my opinions, some observations, and a little bit of data. I'll tell you where you can get more data, but it gets boring, especially this time of night. But the fact of the matter is, candidate experience is really changing the way we're thinking about recruiting, and the approach to how recruiting is evolving has been shifting for a number of years. Now I realize that I'm talking to a group of folks totally committed to this whole process. But I do want to acknowledge Kathleen in the sense that when I first came here about 7, 8 years ago, I was wowed by what she was doing and accomplishing in terms of acknowledging and honoring folks who are paying attention to that stakeholder who does not necessarily have a champion. And it inspired a number of us in the space, which is a pretty large space when you think about there's probably 1 million recruiting folks in the United States alone, let alone around the world. But 3 of us basically started a nonprofit called Talent Board 9 years ago. And that nonprofit now is in its 9th year. We just completed some work and some research, which I'm going to tell you about. It's going to build some of the data that we have. But we are engaged in a way that I think is extraordinarily changing what's going on in the world. We are now global. We raise over $1 million to support the Candidate Experience Awards, but primarily it's focused on the research of how we treat candidates on a global basis. And right now we are literally all over the world. 2 things that we really uncovered that I think are increasingly important, and that is most employers, most recruiters define candidates in many different ways. Very often it's easy to define a candidate as someone who's qualified, someone who gets past the application stage to the interview stage. Everyone is a candidate. You know, we hear more and more different kinds of things from various recruiters. But I will tell you that when you ask a candidate when it is they became a candidate, they all say the same thing. It was the moment they expressed interest. It was the moment that they told you that they really cared about your job in your company. It was the moment that they pressed submit on that application. The reality is, when they did that, they believed they were a candidate, and they had expectations about how they would be treated. And so one of the things we're really uncovering more and more is that when a candidate believes that they are a candidate, they now potentially have an impact on you, your function's performance, your company's performance. And if you're not paying attention to that, you have extraordinary risk, along with a variety of other things that are going on in the world. The other thing is we need to measure the outcomes of treating candidates well or treating candidates poorly. It's nice to get an award, but the fact of the matter is there's some real data that impacts whether or not they're ever going to come back, whether they're ever going to reply to other people. And if you're in retail, and most of you are not, but if you're in retail, you can imagine the impact that may have literally on your bottom line. And so the power of that needs to be measured, and increasingly that's what we're doing. We're attempting to measure that. Over the last 9 years, we've been looking at and growing in different regions around the world. So obviously North America, we started in EMEA about 7 or 8 years ago, and in APAC 3 years ago, or 2 years ago. And we now have about 300 companies a year actively participating in the Candidate Experience Awards. And really it's the largest collaboration of employers sharing data about how they treat candidates that we've ever seen. So it took a little bit to get some employers over some of the issues around that. But if you imagine 300 employers sharing all of the different touch points throughout the entire journey of a candidate, and then being required to have their candidates share or get involved in a mirror survey of all of that, as many as 60 questions that candidates complete. And this year, in 2018, as of September, we had over 130,000 candidates of 200 employers completing surveys that shared how they were treated. That data is being used now by universities, it's being used by a variety of vendors and suppliers that we've given that data to really take a look at some of the insights that come out of that. And I'll suggest that tonight I want to talk about 5, because I think 5 particular practices that you all are probably fully engaged in impact 80% of the variances. And so what I hope you'll take away with you is perhaps one of those you could do more on, maybe 2 of them, whatever. But the reality is you are likely fully engaged in all 5 of them in some way, shape, or form. But I think we need a common language. I think we need a common data that we can start looking at how we really make a shift in recruiting in the long run. These are the companies this year whose candidates rated them the highest. And the average company this year, the candidates rated them 13% higher than last year. We used a combination of Likert scales, NPSs, and a variety of other things. I'm not going to spend a lot of time dealing with that today. I would like to see next year more folks from the defense industry. We've had, over the last few years, a number who participated, but some of you are uncomfortable dealing with it in part because of a whole variety of issues that relate to from privacy to compliance to a whole bunch of other issues. Get over it. You need the data. You need this data in order to go to your bosses, to the CFOs, and show that what you're doing has such an impact that if you don't get investment in being able to do that better, it impacts your ability long-term to hire. And you should be the ones who are the champions, in my opinion. I have lots of data around all of these companies and the practices that are involved. And while many of them are not in your industry, I will tell you some, and you're not going to copy their practices, you would be stimulated by some of the ideas that are going on, and I'll share some of those with you. Then you would be able to think of, oh, that's what we're doing, but we're doing it a little bit differently. We call it something different. So I want to share a little bit of that with you and talk specifically about some of the things that I think these companies are doing that the companies who are not on this list, the hundreds of companies who are not on this list, are not doing. And I admire every single one of the companies that participated, even though they didn't, quote, win. These are really just the benchmark that people get to share. And by the way, every single company that participates gets their data, their candidates' data, and the ability to compare their data and their candidates' data with the aggregate of all of these companies, which is pretty cool. And the cost of doing it, as a nonprofit, is $250, which isn't even a dent in one of your budgets. So, you know, the reality is we're not charging for any of it. So I said before, and I make this claim, this is kind of a weird slide. People getting creeped out on this slide. Good one for Halloween. 80% of your candidates' experience is based on just 5 of your practices. All the rest are nice and cool, but they just add a little bit to it. So focus in first on that issue. And to get at that, let me just say a couple things. One, we're getting now some data that's coming in from other organizations. So like Deloitte recently, this past year, had a very serious study in which they looked at comparing high-impact organizations versus low-impact talent acquisition organizations. They had over, I think they had over 2,800 companies involved in their study. And they found 6 factors. And one of those factors was that 3 out of 4, 75% of high-impact talent acquisition functions focus on steadily improving the candidate experience compared with just 17% of low performers. And so you're seeing emerge in corporations, not just in the United States, but all over the world, a fascination with how do we rethink recruiting from different stakeholders' perspectives, and especially the candidate who has been left out of most of that. This is my favorite slide.
Oh my God.
And every once in a while I have to do a TED Talk, like for 10 minutes and just do that. And this is the only slide I ever show. I can talk for an hour and a half with this slide alone. Because most of us think of ourselves as, we want to treat candidates as customers. Well, we seldom do. But we'd like to. It's a great aspiration. If you ever want to call me up and argue or debate that issue about whether you think you are doing that, feel free. I'm happy to take the call and we can have that conversation. But there's a couple key points I would like to make with this slide. And I've used this slide all over the world. So I will tell you that I was in India with 800 heads of HR in a room, and I asked them, what kind of restaurant is this? And what do you think they said? Diner. They said it in India, they said it anywhere. Everybody understands that. This is a diner. And there's an important point here. The moment you recognize something, the moment you see it as something, as an event, if you will, the moment you have an expectation about how you're going to be treated in it, you bring all the baggage of your expectations to it. And I don't know about you, but if I walk into a diner, I expect a person taller than I with big plastic menus to come up to me with, kind of in my face. I'm from New Jersey. In my face and go, booth, or, would you like the counter, right? And with a big smile, and then pop some coffee right on my, right here, right? That's it. I expect that within instance. This is not a place where I'm expected to stand outside for an hour waiting for someone to let me come in to have their great food. Or some, restaurant that I have to have a reservation and pay somebody somewhere. This is a diner. So my first inference here is this person obviously walked in, did not find anyone, and waited 30 minutes. How long would you wait? It wouldn't be 30, would it? So this is a very patient person. Very patient. But obviously very ticked off. And the point of one of those statistical factors of 5 is setting expectations. Every single candidate has a point of view about how they're going to be treated when they connect to you as a recruiter. And when you think about how you set them up for what's going to come next, and if you get to this stage, this is what will happen. And if you get to this stage, this is what will happen. And some of you get a little bit further in terms of describing the probabilities of whether or not you might even get from this point to that point. So you and your employer need to figure out how to build that set of expectations, not just about the job, because a lot of companies have been doing that pretty well for the last few years. Showing videos, showing testimonials, showing employees doing their job, a lot of different kinds of things. But as recruiters, how well are you visually and engaging candidates to better understand what the process looks like? Is it a sequence of different interviews that you have to take over how much time? Is it panels that you're going to have to deal with? Are we talking about a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months, a couple years? And in some cases, it's not understood by that candidate what that process looks like. How well are you getting that across to them? When they do come in for face-to-face, how much do they really know ahead of time? Do they really know who you are? Do they know each of the individuals that they're going to see? Is there a profile for them? Is there somebody who helps them get from point A to point B? How well trained are all of those characters who are doing those interviews, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a whole lot of expectations that could be built, and I can't imagine anyone who couldn't figure out a way to improve different parts of that journey so that expectations are a key issue. But statistically, when you set expectations and then deliver against them, you're rated higher in terms of that overall experience that the candidate has had. And that leads to a whole variety of things in terms of reapplication, willingness to be coached, to be more competitive next time, and be part of, that portfolio that you have of folks that you might want to tap downstream. So it's powerful when we start thinking about that. I'll mention one other of those 5 factors. So if you look in the upper left-hand corner, somebody got served. And it wasn't me. So what happens when you realize as a candidate that no one's contacting you, no one's engaging you? You're in the system because you had to be, but you never got any further. The recruiter's got a list of all of the folks that show up on the screen, but the recruiter's not going to every one of them if there's a large number, especially those that are clearly not qualified. But yet that person is still sitting there waiting, expecting something, getting nothing, but recognizing that something's happening. People are being interviewed. People are getting jobs. It's just not me. And I know that I applied for your job. And if a good coach, by the way, took me off to the side, I could find your name in a system and infer that you are the recruiter for that job. Trust me. Right? All of you know how to do that and probably have coached others to do it well. So that's an issue, because I'm going to perceive that this is not a fair process. More likely than not. So one of the big challenges you all have is the ability to show that what you are doing is as fair as you can make it. That you are not ignoring folks simply because of who they are. That you are fully engaged in trying to get everybody involved and to give feedback to the extent that it's possible to do so. And that's going to be a key issue. And I'll give you one, in a couple minutes, I'll give you one strong suggestion that I believe impacts about 10 NPS numbers. So it will increase your NPS by about 10, no matter what you do, if you do this. So that's a key issue. I do think that over time, what you need to be able to do is collect the anecdotal evidence as well as the data. And most of you have plenty of anecdotal evidence. If I sat down with any one of you, and a few of you have had conversations with, we could tell stories all day long. There's some fascinating stories about here, about how candidates are treated well and poorly, and all of those kinds of issues. But until you can turn that into data, it's only stories, it's only anecdotes. And increasingly, we're going to have to get a little bit more data. And here's the data we're collecting, and we see that 80% of the variance of how you will be rated by your candidates are these 5 factors. And I'll mention each one, but I'm going to give you some examples in a little bit. So expectations, setting and delivering them, we mentioned that, right? There's one company, Sage, out of Atlanta, that there's a note when they press submit. The candidate is told in 20 days a recruiter will be in touch. Now, they don't promise that the recruiter is going to resolve the problem of hiring in 20 days. They simply say that in 20 days, the recruiter will be in touch. What's interesting is that on the 20th day, their system automatically sends every single candidate who's applied a note that says, was a recruiter in touch? Yes or no? And the response goes back to the head of the staff. Now, I find that fascinating because it ties in a clear statement of what goes on. Now, the recruiter does not have to be able to say, we're going to go with you, we're not going to go with you, we're finished hiring, we're not finished hiring, any of those things, but the recruiter does have to have at least had that first contact, first touch point. And why is that? It's because they've actually done some research to identify what the expectations are of candidates who apply. That they do believe that within 3 weeks, somebody will be in touch. And the disappointment starts after about 2 or 3 weeks. And that's why. It makes sense. Do you know the answer for your candidates is really the point. If you don't set expectations, what do you think they have? Because that's what they're operating on. And that's what we're looking for. I mentioned fairness, influencing the perception of fairness. I'm going to get back to that and give you an example in a few minutes. Accountable is the easy one. How many of you, so just a show of hands, how many of you in your employer actually measures candidate experience? So a few of you. I got to tell you, we all operate against, we all have good sense of what we want and what we believe is the right thing to do in an organization, and all of you obviously have been doing that. But if I've got 100 recruiters, I'm not going to get 100 recruiters to focus in on candidate experience unless I'm measuring it, along with other performance measures. I'm not saying it's the only one. I'm just saying it is one of the pieces of a scorecard. And if it's not on the scorecard, then it's an individual commitment that you have. But we have to go beyond that if we're going to operate as a profession. Listening is kind of the basics. It's like active listening. It's Psych 101. It's being able to say to someone else, here's what I thought you said. And yet, corporation after corporation, if I apply, and or I want to apply, and I have a question about the job, will I find someone in your company that I can connect to and ask that question to? Will you listen to me? What is the mechanism in your corporation to listen? Is it a chat room? Is it an email address? Or is it silence? And only you can answer that for your organization, but the difference is how you're going to be rated in the long run if you're not available to be listened to. And the last is closure, and that's pretty obvious, isn't it? But I'm going to give you some examples of what that looks like from a data point of view as well. So there's 5 things that I think you can do about it. So the first thing is mapping your process. And I suspect some of you have done it in a variety of different ways. It could be a journey of the candidate, right? So at each stage of the process, if you're involved in the sourcing, how do you make people aware? How do you engage them originally? What kind of scripts are being done? How comfortable are those scripts in terms of how people react to them? Many of you have really focused in on some of those kinds of issues, all the way through to how you pre-board folks after they've accepted the offer, and how you're engaging them during that period of time when they're vulnerable to be asked to stay, that kind of thing. So that's kind of a cool set of issues. Can you list all those touch points? How many of them are there? I've heard companies talk about 15. Heard companies talk about 100. how many really are there when you think about it? How many different places do you touch a candidate? And from a recruiter point of view, from an employer point of view. But being able to put that together, I think, is an incredible opportunity for stepping back and really re-looking at your process. And the companies that are doing that are the companies whose candidates long-term are rating them higher. A higher percentage of them are looking at that journey. Another way of looking at it is from like a pipeline. I think many people have been doing that for many years. The difference is, can you look at it from the candidate's perspective? How do they see becoming aware of your company when it's not been there before? How do they see this information about I'm capable? I've demonstrated that I am capable of doing this job. Have they been acknowledged for that? Do you help them see that? They may not be competitive for as a finalist, but fundamentally, do they actually know that they're capable of doing that job? And a whole variety of different approaches. I just threw a few of these out there, but I'm seeing more and more models that are developing that people are using to step back and look at the recruiting process. One thing that I think is happening now with technology is people are overwhelmed with all the different kinds of tools that are out there. It drives me nuts. That could be another hour's worth of conversation here. And I'm sure all of you will get frustrated at various points when you're dealing with one tool and then you have to move to another tool and you're ending up with 14 different desktop pieces to this. And half of it is not your fault. It has to do with crazy investments that your company's making. I get that. I go back to this statement. We've got to start with the customer experience, work backwards to the back before the technology. The technology does not enhance customer experience or candidate experience. Candidate experience is the practice that you decided to use, and technology augments what you do. But if you're going to use candidates, you can use technology to do that really well. And fundamentally, we see that over and over again. When you send to 100 candidates who are not getting any further than the application, a note that says, we're not going any further with you, do not reply to this email. You're doing better than nothing, but not much. Because you're using a default within the ATS. And I will tell you that 70% of the companies out there do it still. Which shows you how far ahead you are. But the truth of the matter is that has to change. Because the candidates get it. They get how they're being treated. And the impact of that is going to come back and haunt a lot of people. I think the second thing is walk in your candidate's shoes. I don't think I have to tell you, but the reality is when I meet with recruiters in very large groups, in very large conferences, a high percentage of them have never applied for their own job. They have no idea what it takes to find the job that you got, attempt to apply to it, examine the difference between that job and perhaps what it would take if I applied to a competitor. The degree to which you can walk in someone's shoes, I think, is extraordinary. I had I heard a talk by Jennifer Carpenter from Delta Airlines about 3 weeks ago. And I was fascinated by it because she had a day, an entire day, that she devoted to developing a lab for recruiting, and forced all of the C-level executives at Delta to go through the lab. So they had to use HireVue to do an interview. They had to use the CRM to find somebody. They had to move that into the ATS. They had to do a whole pile of stuff. By the time they were done, they were ready to invest whatever it took for her to clean up the problems that she was running into in Delta. And I think the only reason she got away with it is because she had just joined Delta in March, and she ran this thing like in May. So I'm sure she kind of made a pitch that said, if I'm going to stay here, you know, you're going to have to understand what it looks like from the candidate's point of view, from my point of view, and what my recruiters have to go through in order to make stuff happen. So I just find that fascinating. I'm just saying, that's the kind of thing I'm kind of looking for in terms of walking in someone's shoes. But even at the recruiter level, I do believe periodically check to make sure that the stuff that you think is out there representing you, in fact, you can use, that it's not broken. I'm shocked when I look at, and I got to tell you, I actually apply to probably 300-400 companies a year. You have no idea what some of the weird stuff I do, but that's one of the things I like doing. And I periodically come across the crappiest stuff I have ever seen. I could apply to more companies more comfortably 35 years ago than I can today. Think about that. And anybody who wants to challenge me on that, I'm happy to chat with you on that anytime. So let's talk about these specific 5 things. Expectations. Setting and delivering them. We ask candidates, is there anything that you wished you were able to ask before you applied? Before you did that screening interview? Before you came in for the interviews? Before you accepted that offer? And we got hundreds of thousands of comments. We're still trying to figure it out. And over the years, you know, we're probably at 500,000 comments that we're trying to consume, if you will. So we are. But I will tell you, one thing stands out. There is one question that just this past year, 50,000 people put that at the top of the list. Before I applied, I wish, what?
How much?
Yeah. I knew salary. How stupid. We are in a culture that can't quite figure out how to manage telling somebody about compensation until what? Until we've asked them their damn expectations, until we've gotten them in, until we feel comfortable, we've told them all the other kind of benefits. Get over it. If I walk into a store and I see a really nice jacket, I want to know how much it costs. It's still a nice jacket. Maybe I will buy it. Get over it. And I will tell you, we still teach recruiters how to avoid answering that damn question. Stop it. It ticks off candidates. And when you are a candidate, you're ticked off. Or what you do is you just go over to Glassdoor or Salary.com or wherever, and you figure out what it is, you know, and even if it's wrong, that's what you're going to be going. So you're driving people away for the wrong reasons. Get over it. Expectations are a key issue. And if you don't know the expectations of your candidates, ask them. It's an easy survey to do. Most of you have the capabilities of doing it. Listening and demonstrate that you have listened. One of the coolest things I like, for example, Lockheed has a chat room for veterans. That's a pretty cool thing. I can see their profiles. Enterprise has 150 recruiters. Every one of them has their email address, their phone number. and the address of the office that they're at. Microsoft profiles all of their recruiters and connections for college. And go on and on. Point is, one of my favorites is Risk Management Solutions, small company. They have a chat room every day. They try to hire PhDs in mathematics. Maybe not as conflicted as some of the cleared folks that you guys have to go after, but the point is that they really want, anytime a PhD in mathematics shows up, they want to have somebody in that room. So they basically say, we have this open from 2 to 4 every single day. There is a top-notch recruiter who will answer every question that you have. And if you bring honest questions, we have honest answers. I go, that's pretty cool. So I went into the chat room. They can't obviously tell who I am. And I said, how many female PhDs in mathematics have you hired in the last 5 years, and where are they now? It's an awkward question. But they answered. It took them a little while. They gave it to me in pieces. But I liked it. It was pretty transparent. It was pretty honest. It wasn't necessarily all good answers. But it appeared to be true, and they also described some of the things they were doing to try to reduce turnover in relation to that as well. So it's pretty powerful. So my point is, you have to be able to listen and respond. The question is, how empowered are you as recruiters to be able to tell the truth about what it is you're hearing to respond properly? And I gotta tell you, that's a conversation that you have with your managers and your bosses within the organization, or the extent to which you're willing to go outside color outside the lines a little bit. And the more experienced you are, the more comfortable you are in terms of how far you can go in relation to some of those. But it shouldn't take 10, 15 years to figure that out. You should be trained from day one in terms of some of those key issues, because that's critical. In terms of the accountability, measuring and rewarding, Capital One here in DC, she went up to, I'm trying to think of her name, she went up to Toronto, but she's back. Had 10,000 candidates a month, and they were asking them an NPS question, basically, would you refer others? They were taking that data, and they were looking at that data by facility, by job family, by level, and by recruiter. And so every recruiter every month had an NPS score. And they stack ranked all the recruiters, and they asked the top 5 recruiters to run a webinar once a month, talking about what it is they thought they were doing that gave them such high marks from their candidates, and then brainstormed with the rest how we could improve. Their NPS scores went from, over a 2-year period, from 20, 25 up to 55, 60. While I'm not going to spend time on NPS scores, you have to be rating fans if you have numbers that are that high. Those are people who did not get hired, who are in fact out there flying your flag and telling you that you should be working for that company. That's pretty powerful if you can get that far. Fairness, I promised a very specific thing here, because a number of companies have changed their practice to ask at the end of the application, the end of the phone screen, the end of the interview, the end of the interview day, a single question. And that question is, what didn't we ask you about your skills, knowledge, and experience that you think is important to tell us in order to compete for this job? Now let me tell you why it's important. we all have spent a lot of time figuring out what we want to know. So we've studied, we know the jobs, we know how important they are, we know the critical components, we know the questions to ask to get the information that allows for us to make the best decision, we think. But by being open to the fact that maybe there's something I didn't ask you, you're demonstrating that maybe there's a reason why you came here that we didn't cover. And this is your opportunity, to tell me a little bit about what I haven't asked you that you think is really cool when you applied for this job. I think that opens up this sense of fairness. I think that it covers some of the things we're no longer doing, like cover letters, as much as we used to in the past. And it gives that person the opportunity to feel like they have said everything they need to say in the application or the interview or the interview day. And I got to tell you that question we do ask, were you able in this part of your journey to share everything you thought was important for you to compete for this job? And the answer to that question has the most significance statistically in terms of how you're rated. Your candidates want to feel when they leave that they have said everything they came to say. And some of them have trouble doing that, you know that. So you obviously help them do whatever they have to do. But this one thing seems to have a critical value. And so I strongly encourage folks to think about different ways that they can accomplish that. I think there's different ways that you can do it, clearly. And the last disclosure, we still found of the companies that thought they were doing a great job, 30% of their candidates never heard anything. Nothing. And a candidate, remember, is everybody who applies. Never heard nothing. And 60% of those who did hear basically got that basic, thank you, do not reply to this email. We can do better than that. How hard is it to have a couple different scripts that are kind, engaged, and talk about, I'm sorry, we're not going forward with you. These are the kinds of things that this job usually requires at these levels. If you can improve your skill, knowledge, and experience around that, please come back and reapply. Let me know. Obviously, if they get to the interview, that's another issue. If they get to the hiring managers, and those hiring managers spend a lot of time with them, transference takes place from you to the hiring manager, and you know what? It's the hiring manager that should be getting back to them. Of course, there's not a lot of hiring managers here, but that's another issue.
That's a recruiter program.
Yeah, I know. Well, I get pissed at everybody, so it's good. But it's getting better is the cool part of that. So, fourth, I'm going to give you 5, and then we're done. Fourth, here's the problem. Once you've really figured out how you are going to engage your candidates, and you really feel you're doing a good job, it's still a problem. There's other needs to be balanced, and that's really the implication here is it's not an easy job. I think a recruiter is one of the toughest jobs there is. And fundamentally, you're trying to deal with the needs of hiring managers, your bosses, the candidates, et cetera, et cetera. So fundamentally, juggling all of that is not an easy issue. Those of you who have gotten to a world-class level and being able to do that, God bless you. I think it's wonderful. And whatever you can get out of that is great. But I believe, for the years that I was a recruiter, for the years I was a recruiting leader, this is a profession. And, if it's just merely a job, I get it. But I think everybody in this room, you've been doing it for a while, you love doing it, and you'd like to be able to be acknowledged for it. And I think this is a wonderful thing. In the end, the last is you got to choose what path you go, whether it is a job or it is a career, and whether or not you're going to do it in a way that makes you feel good about having done it. And I think that's powerful, and I really admire and acknowledge all of you in this room for your efforts in that way. This is kind of a passive way of saying that I think we should really just stick a fork in it. But if you do those things and think outside the box, I wish you good hunting.